Welcome to Living in Connection, where we explore the nature of physical and non-physical reality and what that means in your life.
Hello and welcome again to another in our ongoing series of discussions, this between myself, Dirk Denning, and Frank DeMarco. We were having a little debate before we started here about what it is we're going to talk about today. And I think, Frank, where you decided you wanted to start us off with is that all is well.
Yeah, we didn't exactly have a debate as much as sort of wandering around in the swamp looking for the path, but I think we found it. I thought we would start with all is well because it's particularly appropriate today. The guys upstairs gave us that specific message on September the 11th, 2001, the very night of the attacks on the towers. And those were the days when Rita Warren was asking questions and I was answering from an altered state. And she was extremely upset about, of course, the state of the world and the things that were going on. And they said something or other, and then they said, all is well. And she said, they said, all is always well. And over the years, every so often, we've come back to that and looked at it. And I think it's an important statement because when you look at the state of the world, you're going, the state of the world couldn't be any worse, or probably could, and we'll get there. But even at the time, the guy said, and this includes nuclear bombs, radioactive waste, World War II, Stalags, everything, because what they really meant when we finally boiled it down was all is well does not mean I like everything I'm looking at. It doesn't even mean everything is for the best. What it does mean is the universe always knows what it's doing and the system always works. Now, how can you say the system works when there's wars, starvation, you name it? And the answer is, I'm going to have to paraphrase them, but I don't think they can sue me, so it's all right. The purpose of the 3D world is not to be happy. If it were, it would be a terrible design failure. I've said that many times. I mean, many people are not happy, and even people who are relatively happy aren't always happy. But the purpose of 3D life is to have us stuck in one moment of time at a time so that we will be concentrated whether we want to be or not, and we can experience the delayed consequences of our decisions. In the non-3D, as I understand it, without those time constraints, you can create instantly. The poet Yeats's ideal creation without toil. But the problem is, as soon as you change your mind, it changes too, and again, it goes away. In 3D, you have to learn it a little bit more the hard way because it persists or it resists, either one, probably both. Okay, if that's the purpose of 3D, and the guy said from the very beginning, you are there to choose. We were talking about free will and predestination, and they said it's got to be free will because you're there to choose. Why would we stop your free will, or why would we judge it, or why would we condemn it if that's what you're there to do? Meaning, by the exercise of our free will, moment by moment, over the course of a lifetime, we basically create who we're going to be by the time we die. We have many options as we're going through, but this says, I will be kind, I will be kind, I will be kind. Maybe I won't. I will be vindictive. You can wander all around, or you might be the kind of person who's always the same, which is rare, or you might grow from one thing into another, but you're choosing, you're deciding, you are creating. Well, if you have 7,000 million people on Earth all creating out of who they are and what they are, and they all are comprised of strands that may have different values than we do, some of which may hate each other, some of which may help each other. it's going to be chaos. It's going to look like chaos. And it depends on what you focus on. If you're focusing on the state of the world, meaning the world should be a peaceful, happy place at any given moment, good luck. It's not going to happen. Oh, I mean, I suppose it theoretically could happen, but I can't imagine it. On the other hand, if you look at this is the place where everybody is working out their own salvation, as the Buddhists would say, then it's a perfect success. That's what I think they mean by all is well, all is always well. I know that when people start thinking about working on themselves, they sometimes feel guilty and they feel like I'm taking time away from time that should be made to make the world a better place. Well, making the world a better place, that sounds very noble and it's a nice idea, but you don't know how to make the world a better place. You know, the guys have always said it's a good thing to always want to help. That doesn't mean you know what you're doing.
Well, and this also goes into the paradox I've seen so often in my life where the path that seemed to be the right path was the wrong path. But that wasn't obvious until later. If we go back and look at nuclear weapons, even as an example, horrible, horrible things. And yet, were it not for their existence and the mutually assured destruction ideas that followed from it, it's very likely that we would have gone through much larger, much more horrible wars than actually did occur.
Seems like it. Which actually turns your statement around again, because what looks like a good thing is actually a bad thing, except if you look at it in terms of other consequences, maybe it wasn't a bad thing, or more likely it was both. And it depends on which way you look at it.
Yeah, and this comes up over and over and over again in every field. You commented too about basically taking more difficult paths and the gain that you get from that going through life. And I've seen that a lot, where doing something that required lots of work, intellectually, physically, and all kinds of other ways, in order to learn the skills you needed to make the mistakes that had to occur along the way, there was no other way to get to the really wonderful place that you could get if you went that way. Whereas, like you say, you could have chosen to just sit on a couch and watch TV or golf all the time and gain.
It might not have been a bad thing either. I mean, they don't seem to have, now I'm probably wrong on this, but they don't seem to have the kinds of preferences that you would expect they would, you know?
Right.
You would think they would be skewed toward good, mercy, altruism, or productivity, even creativity. And they like those things, it's quite clear, but not to the extent of saying, well, let's put that a different way. It's more like everything has the defect of its qualities, but every defect also has qualities. And again, what do you make of what you got? You know, and looking at it after the fact, okay, this was bad, but this was good. But this looked good and turned out to be bad, which may turn out to be good later on. And I think that's a good lesson in humility, which a lot of people need.
So what do the guys have to say about this?
Actually, I was just about to ask you for your guys, since my guys sort of came in with me.
So what they're saying is that you're close. The problem is that from your perspective, you have all kinds of attributes that you value or that you think have value. From the greater scheme of things, the real attributes that have value aren't even on your list. You don't see them. About exploring what the world's potentials are and about understanding each other and how the world evolves, how it develops through time. There's so much more that's involved in the awakening of awareness into the greater world than you actually see.
That's an interesting, that isn't something my guys would ever say. So I think this has something more to do with us as well as, you know, how they're coming through us. Because what you're saying makes sense as I'm hearing it. But my guys would have said more like, it doesn't matter what you're doing, concentrate on what you're creating. And it isn't an either or, I don't think. I think it's a both. You know, so if you take like an Abraham Lincoln, his creation of himself over his lifetime would be a consistency of kindness and of thoughtfulness and also of iron determination and you know, all those things. At the same time, history would have had a hole in it without him. You know, so again, it depends on your point of view. Would you say Abraham Lincoln was here primarily for the overall picture, or would you say Abraham Lincoln was primarily here for Abraham Lincoln and he fit into the overall picture? You could make a case either way. I think both is probably more likely.
I think this also dances around the question of what is the 3D world about?
I didn't have any question about that. I thought they had covered that pretty clearly by saying the 3D world is a slowing down of reality so that you can have delayed consequences. But as you know from other times and from over the years, we are in 3D, but we are also in non-3D.
Right.
So it isn't like we're sort of stuck down here and we're puppets of some, regime. We are puppets of ourselves, perhaps, if you wanted to look at it that way. Does the 3D world need a greater purpose than to provide us with a workshop or a laboratory or a playground or whatever it is?
Whatever it is. Yeah, well, I think the other part of it is a developmental place where we can stretch beyond ourselves, or at least what we perceive to be ourselves, both in connection to all that is, as well as to all of our brethren of, whether it's humans, animals, plants, rocks, whatever the rest of the world is, to not be so parochial, to not be caught in our limited view of things.
Well, now that's a very interesting statement. That gives me a different view. I hadn't thought of it before. Mine, as I just finished saying, my view of it has always been, this is the laboratory or the workshop for us to create ourselves. And I'm sure that's true. But then as you say that, given that all of reality is created out of thought, at least that's our assumption, and that the rest of reality may not have anything to do with human concerns, or it may, but it may not. I mean, the guys have said our higher selves or our larger expanded being may include trees, rocks, clouds, anything. There's no aliens, there's no knowing, But the way you're looking at it is much larger than just humans. And I think that's hard to remember, but important to remember. And of course, the other part of it is, but we don't know.
But I think the other key part of that is not just thinking about it as more than just humans. It's being within any of the forms that are here, of experiencing the world in the way that others do, to actually reach to them and to recognize we are all interconnected, not just in the webs of things that, say, science recognizes or in the emotional webs that other fields recognize, but that we are fundamentally linked. We are part of one another. We are part of one whole.
Yes, yes. And what are you saying that's different? Because there is something different there. What is it?
Well, I think what it is that when we come into being, we very much have a thing where we identify as the limit of our bodies. We identify as a discrete thing separate from all other things.
Although apparently some people don't, but the vast majority do, yes. Okay, and so?
I think the point of it then is to recognize, even though that's true, it's also not true. Just as all is well, all is always well, we are individual and yet we're not. We are interconnected intimately all the time, even when we don't realize it.
I think this discussion would benefit immensely if we had a better idea of what the non-3D world is like. Now, you may have a pretty good idea, but I don't know. But I know that I do not. I've touched on it once in a while with the guys, and it's well, back when we were talking to Rita, they said, well, you like to think of us as teachers, but what if we told you we were roofers?
Yep.
Well, it's interesting because all of that, all one thing, is not only everything on Earth, but it's everything in matter. So all the planets, all the supernovae, everything is all part of one thing. Now, I recognize that one thing, it's well to say that, but it's also, there are neighborhoods. There are some things you're closer to than other things. But now you've got me wondering. Not that I ever thought I had a handle on it, but now thanks a lot. You just shook it up a little more.
Open the door.
Well, Well, why does the world need? No, no, that's a wait a sec. We reminded you a while ago that minerals, for instance, hold the time. They provide stability so that the world doesn't change every half second. We reminded you that animals, plants, minerals, humans, angelic spirits, all the various what they used to call kingdoms, have their own particular specialty, call it, or quality. They're all part of one thing, but they're specialized parts of one thing. It's not just Jello. It's all intricately connected. And the world, as a forest of trees experiences it, is probably indescribable to you and would be unrecognizable to you, except not emotionally. What's the word? Intuitively. Yeah. They said we can probably guess or get a feeling for it, but not not otherwise. I suppose if you carry that far enough, that goes for atomic energies as well. Electron, quarks, whatever. You guys have something to add to that?
Well, my mind went off in strange directions as you were talking. In a lot of different directions. Like one of them is once upon a time, a long time ago, in a former lifetime, in this life.
In other words, 20 minutes ago.
Well, actually, it's about 1979, which seems forever ago and yet yesterday at the same time. I was an engineering officer of the watch training sailors to run nuclear submarines. And in doing that, there came a day when a particular thing happened on the reactor, and I have to be careful what things I do and don't say about this, but the reactor entered a condition while we were starting it up that was a little unusual. And it had an oscillation that was occurring that was not anything that we had run into before that was part of the normal plan. And it turned out to be a very temporary thing. It was not a problem of any kind. But as it was happening, you talk about the intuition, I quite suddenly had a visual in my mind where I was both reaching out to the reactor and feeling the reactor, which will sound absurd to anybody in the hard sciences. But the core of the thing is less than 10 feet away from me physically. And I reached out to it. And at the same time, I'm visualizing in my mind what is happening. And I could see this three-dimensional, actually even more than three-dimensional, but I could see what was happening to the reactor, what it's doing. And what I'm visualizing is actually the flow of various energies of neutrons in the reactor and what's happening within the fuel and the water and all the rest of the stuff that's there. It was mesmerizing to think about. And yet that entire event lasted just a few seconds because once I understood it, I also knew this is how we leave this state. And so we could continue and resolve where we were and move on. But that ability to connect with the world was something that at the time I thought of it more as an intellectual exercise. I did not then, until this moment, think about it as that I'm becoming one with the reactor.
Yes, yes. And the time did not enter into it. You were in a timeless state because you were not in sequential processing.
Right.
It was more like a gestalt.
Yeah. And in terms people can relate to, it'd be like being in a swimming pool and having the surface of the water flowing in a particular way because of things you've done. If you had somebody bouncing up and down in the water and you created waves, whatever, something like that. That wasn't what it was, but it's akin to that. And being able to feel what it was doing. And I never even thought about it during the times that I ran it about how did the reactor feel about that? Could it even have a feeling?
You couldn't have talked to anybody about that.
No,
so I'm
not
surprised that you didn't actually think about it.
Right.
Tie this in more explicitly to what we're talking about.
Well, we're talking about how all of everything is intertied, interrelated, and interconnected, and moving beyond the simple idea of I am me, I end at the end of my skin, this is me. And the world revolves around me and the things that I want and the things that I need and desire. And maybe to a little degree of, I'll relate with other people, other humans that are near me, and et cetera, et cetera. But we're actually much more than that. And that a part of what this world is about is coming to understand that and being able to relate in those ways where you can extend far beyond yourself. And so you have all of the compassion and empathy for others, but much more than that, that you truly are connected in the living world.
But that begs a question, and it used to bother me. I hadn't thought of it for a long time. Why does this have to be? Why do we have to go through a process? How did we wind up in this amnesiac state where and delusory state where we think we are other than what we are? We don't experience connections that are being experienced beneath the level of our consciousness every second. How did we wind up in that state, and what's the advantage to it?
I wish I knew. We've talked before that one of the things, occasionally I will run into people who remember when they were kids, remembering from before, not just other lives, but remembering the, if you will, the Aldi, remembering where we come from, or, those words don't even really work, but they remember the connection.
Let's pause for just a second and remind people that we describe the world as 3D, meaning what we're used to, non-3D, meaning stuff that is not tied to time, and all-D, meaning both together, considered together.
Right. And so this is remembering the non-3D. And for some people, that goes to the point of remembering some sort of discussions, agreements, and discussions presume we're having language, and none of that necessarily applies either. But having some sort of a plan, if you will, about what's my life going to be about, and who are these people that I'm going to be in it with. But
yeah, I've never known what to make of that because I haven't experienced it, and I don't take people's word for it just because they say so. Right. It may not have been the way they think it was, or maybe it was. But even so, I mean, Dirk, even taking that as gospel, as fact, how did we wind up in that situation where it even was necessary? That's the question.
Exactly. And that takes me to the next place, which was, for me, when I was a little kid, I remember so clearly, I don't remember what they're describing, but what I do remember is from the time I was very small, for the first 10 years of life or so, I was connected to everything. I didn't have this division that my skin was the end of me. I was connected with everything, and I knew it. And it wasn't a matter of consciously thinking it or knowing it. It's like turning your mind, and a part of you is a part of that you're there.
You took it for granted.
I took it absolutely for granted. And so there were things like, if I wanted to know where my friend Mark was, I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't go ask somebody. I would just turn my mind and know where he was because I've connected with him where he is.
What do you suppose the advantage is to us that we can't do that routinely?
I don't know. And that it goes to your question of, why do we forget that way?
Actually, why don't you ask your guys, what's the advantage to us of not being able to do that routinely the way you were able to do it for a while?
The biggest advantages that you run into are that without having the loss of connection, the lessons, if you will, which is one way that people view it, and it's not entirely correct, but the lessons, the opportunities, the exploration of the world is not really available in the same way. By having the limitations, you're forced to actually explore in other ways and to experience the world.
All right, I can hear that. It's another form of deliberate limitation in order to concentrate us.
Right.
Interesting. Although there's so many limitations, you wouldn't think we'd need one more, or wouldn't think one less will do any harm.
And even as I hear that coming through, I'm of the mind of, why is that necessary? How's that beneficial? I don't know the answers.
Yeah, I really do think the biggest thing we provide to the other side is our intensity. And it may be that the hotter the temperature in this cauldron that we're in, the more intense we are and the more benefit they get out of it. I really don't know.
True.
There was a man, I think he was an Englishman, it was a long time ago, and he may have been in Parliament, but he said to somebody else, I wish that I could be as sure of anything as that young man is of everything.
Yeah, all kinds of things. Well, I'm not sure where we went with this discussion, but I think it was interesting along the way, and people may find it useful. I don't know.
Well, it may be enlightening when we watch it ourselves to find out what it is that we said, because we didn't stick to all as well as we may have defined it, but I think it flowed. So we'll see.
Well, I think it goes to the other theme that we talked about, which was living in faith. That as we go through life, that there is some meaning means there's a path involved in some way. And knowing that we are supported throughout. And whether we see something as an adversity in the near term or not, that there is a gain for us to be had in it.
Ultimately, there isn't really any choice but to live in faith, as I'm thinking of it at the moment, except that some people are living in faith of meaninglessness,
Right.
or they're living in faith that things will fail, or they're living in faith that everything is collapsing. That's still living in faith, but it's not a very productive faith, and it's not a helpful one. And it seems to me just as easy to live in faith that the universe knows what it's doing.
For some reason, I'm reminded of a scene from, I'm not sure what, whether it was a TV show or whatever, or maybe it's out of some philosophy, of people so caught in themselves and caught in this moment. And the instructor or whoever this is on the outside is saying, wake up. And the whole point is trying to come to awareness, to be actually here.
Well, again, I would have to back it up and say, how did we get in that situation? Why can't we be in the world and aware from the beginning? And I believe that some few people are. Rita's grandchild, she was only 2 years old and they were calling her the young Buddha. And I don't mean Rita's family, but others were as well, because she seems to have come in wide open. And if there's some reason why some do and some don't, and most don't, I don't know what it would be, but it may be that that's our future. Maybe by the time you and I are long gone, everybody will come in remembering, which would be an entirely different animal.
Well, and that also goes off into other areas, and maybe this is too far to go with this one, and this may just be a throwaway, but I remember about the time that we first began to get more involved with Rita, or that I did, that she had a young woman working for her that was astounding. And it's not for any of the reasons people might imagine. She was an astounding person to begin with, but she was an outlier. And as it turned out, I was attending a program at the Monroe Institute at the same time, and one of my roommates was an equally astounding outlier for a particular reason. And what it was is that both of them were breatharians. They did not eat.
Yeah.
And it's like, how is that even possible? And why would, all the same sorts of unanswerable questions arose. And I had the opportunity in that case to watch with both of them and to see, no, this is absolutely true. This is not being made up. It's not false.
Well, let's
no logical sense.
Let's maybe talk about limits and our ideas about limits in our next session.
Sounds good.
Good. Wrap this one up at this point.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
Indeed. And we'll join again. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
Enjoyed this episode? Please press like. Please press subscribe to stay informed of new episodes as they appear. We would love to hear from you in the comments section below, and we wish you the very best in connecting with your own guidance.